Hello and a welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. As migration tensions rise across Europe, 6 EU interior ministers recently convened atop Germany's Zugspitze mountain, pledging to tighten external borders and accelerate deportation of migrants who break the law. Meanwhile, massive anti-immigration marches have swept across Poland, amplifying far-right rhetoric and challenging EU migration norms. Joining us to analyse these developments is John Dalhuisen, Senior Fellow at the European Stability Initiative and one of Europe's most respected voices on migration, asylum policy and human rights. Welcome, sir, to TVP World, and thanks for taking the time.
Good evening.
All right. So the German summit that was held yesterday, outcomes in your view?
Not a lot, certainly not a lot that was very new. And very few of the headline decisions will change very much in the end when it comes to tackling irregular migration, which was very much their priority. There will be a big emphasis on returns. There has been an emphasis on returns for many, many years now. Less than 25% of all those who should be deported are deported, and even less when you take out European countries which do admit some. Return hubs, this idea of having kind of way stations in periphery European countries outside the European Union from which people can be returned, are very unlikely to change very much. So the emphasis on return is probably, will sound good for a few months, but won't work very much in practice. Expanding internal border checks, again, will change very little. There was perhaps overlooked by others one big chance to introduce a more effective policy, and that will be trying to transfer asylum seekers to safe third countries. This requires a change in EU law, but the 6 there all approved this innovative idea. And in the 18 months to come, this could well be effective, but very little of the others. Policies that grab the headlines will change much.
Right, okay, so thank you for laying that out. A number of interesting issues you raise. The first is that very few of deportations have actually been carried out. 25%, you say, less than. What is the reason for that?
Well, it's very difficult. You need countries to cooperate. You need them to sign off on the planes being returned. Every plane full of maybe even only 10 Gambians to Gambia causes a protest in Gambia. Returns are deeply unpopular in countries that we want to try and return people to. And they are also politically difficult. They're logistically difficult. They're expensive. You have to get hold of the people that you want to return. Often they then disappear in the countries that have issued them expulsion orders. So the whole business of return is really a red herring. You need a place that is willing to take them back. And that is very rarely a country of origin.
Right. Well, we saw that challenge with the UK, who was planning on returning illegal refugees to Rwanda, or sending illegal refugees to Rwanda, and that fell through because it was challenged in the courts.
That didn't fall through because Rwanda didn't agree to it. Rwanda would have accepted them. That fell through because UK courts decided that Rwanda's asylum system wasn't good enough. Had Rwanda's asylum system been good enough, that is the kind of system that could work legally, and is much more likely to be effective for countries like Poland, Italy, Greece, than the current policy priorities.
Now, those who enter the EU illegally, in other words, without proper documentation, without having gone through any vetting, what proportion of those are actually assigned for deportation, let alone actually deported?
Well, of those that apply for asylum, and that's the majority of those arriving irregularly, the vast majority, around 50% or so get protection of one kind or another. So at least 50% are not getting asylum. So in the last few years, that would have been several 100,000 people a year, of which far fewer than 50,000 were returned. Far, far fewer, because those who are coming and claiming asylum are often coming from countries that it's very difficult to return people to. So if I was to make an estimate, it would be around 5% of all those arriving irregularly who don't get asylum are returned. Just to say a very small proportion.
Right. Okay. So it doesn't sound it doesn't sound particularly optimistic at the moment, and it sounds as though there are social pressures beginning to bubble under the surface, doesn't it? I mean, I mentioned the protests, marches, and so on across Poland, but it's not only in Poland. I mean, there has been this kind of move by local people to say we've had enough. What can the EU do?
But it's not obvious that it's the EU that can do an awful lot. There's always this tendency in Europe to think that the EU must be the institution that sorts this out. It's the authority that will sort it out. What really needs to happen is agreements between countries and other third countries, not so much the EU. The EU could back it, could support it, but really it's countries like Italy, external border countries like Italy, Greece, Poland, need agreements with countries that they can send asylum seekers to safely and legally. And
yes,
asylum seekers
but the EU has its own human rights legislation, which is a barrier to deportation, which extends the process, to reach a final decision. Also, the EU is imposing shares of illegal migrants across member states. So there is a role that the EU can play and does play. However, I'd like to focus, if you don't mind, in the last few minutes on the protests in Poland. Now, I hope, or you may have been watching what has happened, and it sounds pretty organised, and it sounds as though there's quite a large cross-section of a Polish society that joined these protests. What does that tell you?
Well, I think if you look behind the protests at the wider numbers, it's clear that it's not a small number of people. In fact, in most of Europe's larger countries, in fact, all the larger ones, it's now a majority of the population that wants to see lower levels of immigration, all kinds of immigration, legal, illegal. And it's certainly a very large majority that wish to see lower numbers of irregular migration. Now, it's not surprising when numbers are already so large that more extremist groups with more fringe opinions on how these policies are to be affected and how far they should go, should be able to organize demonstrations that attract not just far-right or fairly toxic views, but also extend quite far into a mainstream society. So I think it's that larger fraction of the public that is beginning to tire of, or has conspicuously tired of, high levels of immigration, and in particular irregular migration. That's really the big issue here.
In your experience, sorry to interrupt you, but we've only got a couple of minutes left. In your experience, looking back, over similar situations, if you see any or can think of any, what actually is the natural evolution of this, what may well be a toxic mix?
Well, I mean, the correlation between levels of irregular migration and the popularity of populist parties, particularly far-right populist parties, is very clear. It's demonstrably clear over the last decade. The AfD in Germany surged in popularity in 2015-16. It waned in 2019-20 as numbers came down. As numbers went up again in 23-24, the AfD has surged in popularity. This pattern is repeated across Europe. So really, it's irregular migration that fuels the most most problematic political narratives and fuels populist parties. If irregular migration is under control, many publics revert to seeing regular migration as a positive.
Right. So what can the Polish government do to tamp down the numbers of irregular or illegal migrants? And actually, you say it's very difficult to deport them, but what can they do to maintain some kind of social stability as well?
Well, first, it clearly does need to tackle this issue. Secondly, it would wish to do so humanely and lawfully. These can be combined with, indeed, strong border controls. But those who arrive and cross, really the answer is to find a safe third country that all those arriving irregularly can be sent to, that agrees to receive them. So you have a migration agreement with that country. It could be a country elsewhere in Eastern Europe, outside the EU. It could be further afield. And that is the way to remove the incentive to cross. Because if you reach Poland from Belarus, you will not stay in Poland. You will be transferred to another country. Not the country you want to go to, but a country that you would be safe in.
Understood.
And this really should be the focus.
Thank you very much, John Dalhuisen, for your analysis. Have a good evening, sir.
It's a pleasure.
Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.